Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, which is going to cover the topic of caregiving and touch a little bit on Medicare. We'll touch on Medicare a little bit at the end of this presentation. We'll begin with this alarming statistic, which essentially has to do with the fact that by the time we finish our discussion today, a very large number of individuals, somewhere on the order of about 300 or so, will be treated in an emergency room under normal circumstances. I'm not talking about COVID-19 in this case. I'm talking about what happens with individuals as we become older, become more prone to fall, and so forth. There are other issues that also besiege the elderly, and these have to do with cognitive issues related to faltering memories and cognitive ability, as well as issues that come up with respect to things that happen in the home, things that happen in which they are sometimes compromised or taken advantage of. And part of it has to do with, the reality of aging and the potential chronic conditions that often emerge in the aging process, including such things as diabetes and arthritis, dementia and cataracts, depression and heart disease. Elder care challenges reveal very stark realities and many unanswered questions, including things along the lines of who's really monitoring loved one's health, how future decisions may be made, and what happens when staying in the home is not an option at all. So, again, this is Peter Sicoso, and I just want to be clear that everything that we're speaking about tonight has to do with a subject that is extremely important, but one of which we are relying on a great deal of outside information. I'm part of a group called Sherpa Financial. We work with Woodbury Financial Services, and the presentation tonight contains a great deal of information that I hope will be of value to you. Elder caregiving is challenging, stress-inducing, and complex, and most families have not planned for it. So the solution may very well be a caregiving plan that addresses many of the major aspects of your loved one's life. As we begin, we think about what's the most important consideration as we think about how to solve this problem. And we begin with a number of keys. We think one key is to ensure that those that we care about are well cared for through a level of continued care and smart planning. Medical needs must be met. There's no question about it. These are not things that we have any option about. And so we can use an approach where we think about these issues ahead of time and assess what are the biggest concerns and what is the best methodology to support those individuals. Time is of the essence, especially because things can change very rapidly. This not only has to do with the aging process, but as we know, as we're living through the current pandemic of COVID-19, that there are other reasons why things can change very rapidly among the elderly. So we begin with thoughts about planning for this potential reality. It won't happen for everyone, but speaking about it early on as best we can is a very good plan. And this includes in the discussion with the individual for whom the care will be directed. And by the way, that individual might be us as we get older. It may be us having discussion with our own children or other people in our lives about our own care. But for many of us, it'll be about the care of those that we care about and are somewhat older than us, and we're looking to look after them. So what are the main issues that we need to address in trying to unravel or solve this problem? Well, we think there are a number. One is that we have to consider the various aspects of a caregiving plan. This includes medical, legal, financial, and personal issues. We have to understand the role of the caregiver, and therefore what does not only a caregiver do, but what can we expect from a caregiver, and how can we organize help around that caregiving process. When we think about the medical issues related to care, what we're really talking about are what is often thought of as the activities of daily living. And these activities of daily living are typically thought of as those activities that are most critical for daily life, including eating, bathing, dressing, toileting, continence, and transferring. And it is often these characteristics that we look at with respect to determining whether someone is eligible for long-term care from an insurance perspective or in terms of needing that care from a care perspective. It is often said that if one needs help with more than two of these, it's very likely they need long-term care support. In addition to these items, there's also the issue of cognitive ability and cognitive decline. And we often say is that if there's cognitive decline, it really doesn't matter if any of these activities of daily living have been impacted, because an individual will need a level of care as the progression of the disease continues. One of the things we look at early on is in-home help needed? And this could include medical help, more basic assistance, and oftentimes we can get support with respect to recognizing this through someone who sees it on a frequent basis, has a really good lens into this issue. Oftentimes these individuals have studied and have been trained in elder care, and that type of specialist can be very helpful. As we go through this process, we'll want to know whether or not there's any health insurance or other type of insurance to support the individual during this process. Usually we're talking about long-term care insurance, but more recently we have begun to see life insurance policies that have long-term care riders. And so the life insurance benefit could be used during an individual's lifetime if they qualify as needing long-term care. It's important to review these policies. In many cases that we find ourselves in, we're looking back at policies that may have been instituted 30 years ago, and they may be policies instituted 20 years ago. They may be Cadillac versions of long-term care insurance, or they may be very much skimmed down versions of long-term care insurance. Factors like, what will the insurance cover? Will it cover the recipient with respect to being able to stay in their home? Is it only facility care? Does it allow for external help to come into the home, to be used to be taken by anyone, to be provided by anyone? Or is there a qualification that is required for those people administering the care? And then, is the policy written in such a way that it pays a per diem benefit, a daily benefit, or is it a monthly benefit in which care can be aggregated and paid for on the basis of care needed in a specific 30-day period, 31-day period? It's important to understand that that other program called Medicare does not cover long-term care. Only individuals who find themselves at a point where they have no other resources can qualify for a different program called Medicaid, which will cover long-term care with many restrictions as to location, type of coverage, type of facility, etc. So it's important to understand all the Medicare policy information in the event a long-term care event occurs, because it may be possible for a brief period of time to get some Medicare coverage, especially through therapeutic care, like perhaps care that might be needed for physical therapy after some type of fall, or there may be some provision of care that can be provided, coverage that can be provided through a type of Medicare insurance, perhaps a supplemental plan or a drug plan. Certainly an aspect of thinking forward about this type of planning is to make sure that our legal documents are in place. This includes critical legal documents like powers of attorney and healthcare directives, wills, and possibly estate planning. A healthcare directive and a power of attorney are really critical and should be considered as the priority documents that we work on as we begin to develop a healthcare plan. A healthcare agent and a healthcare directive are important because we find very frequently that as individuals find themselves in this situation, they can become confused, they can become overwhelmed with the pressures involved in terms of decision making, either for a spouse or for themselves, and they may not have the cognitive ability or even the mental state to be able to really deal with many of the issues that are coming at them. So being in a position to help that individual by acting as a healthcare agent and having a healthcare directive can be extremely important. A power of attorney means that someone else can act on your behalf in the event that an event occurs that leaves you incapacitated or not fully able to execute what otherwise would be decisions that you would make on your own. Oftentimes, these documents are designed in such a way that they are called springing documents. In other words, they come into play upon a certain event occurring or a certain set of circumstances that have come into play. It is possible that due to the level of assets that someone may find themselves in terms of the coverage that they could be able to afford, that a Medicaid path may be one that is going to be followed. In those cases, there are such things as asset protection plans for individuals that are clearly destined to be utilizing the Medicaid system. We need to be extremely careful about these, and it's very important to understand, however, that any type of asset transfer needs to be done in a very careful, methodical way, because if it is deemed that an individual sought to transfer assets prior to a long-term care event within 5 years, Medicaid can deny the coverage, and that individual will find themselves with no ability for the coverage for a period of time based on the level of assets that have been transferred. So this is something that needs to be done with great care, and there are particular types of documents and trusts that can be used to help to some extent with this type of asset protection. Certainly we want to review, or perhaps in some cases even just create an estate plan so that we make sure that the recipient has the correct care in the future. Sometimes we do this work at one point in our lives and time goes on and things change and we haven't really updated our plans. And so a good idea is to take a look at a will, take a look at any other type of estate planning documents to see if any updating should occur, if there's anything that really is required based on changes that have occurred over time. And certainly the financial aspect of long-term care is one we can't deny. It is not a situation that we can do much about, but the cost of care can be quite high. In fact, staggering if we get all the way to the point of needing full-time skilled nursing care. So what we want to think about is whether it is for ourselves or for another individual, determining the sources of income. Are there some that will continue no matter what? What about expenses? Are there any that we need to think about curtailing? Do we even have a handle on them? Do we know where assets and liabilities are? And oftentimes, working with financial professionals, you can get some support in this area. But one of the things that we find frequently is that as we begin to help someone with this issue, we find that it can be awkward. If it's a child trying to help a parent, they may only know that the parent always took care of their own affairs. They may not know what the level of pension or IRA income or annuities or other types of income are. They just know that mom and dad took care of themselves. They may not know what all the expenses are, both for ongoing insurance and healthcare costs, as well as housing and transportation and other expenses. So reviewing that and developing a budget and understanding where the assets and where the liabilities are is extremely important. You wouldn't want to be in a situation where, as a result of a long-term care event, somehow a mortgage payment or a credit line payment went unpaid, and then that created a problem with a lien or possibly even something worse. So reviewing current investments and savings, making sure that we understand what assets are easily attainable to handle this care, and also to think about a very tax efficient way, perhaps, of distributing such assets. Titling is always important with financial documents, but particularly important as we think about planning for a potential long-term care event. Many of the clients that I work with who think about this ahead of time find that it is necessary to make certain types of provisions, especially in those cases where there's an early onset cognitive disorder. And so having the right type of titling of assets can make that much easier down the road, including having things like powers of attorney to make decisions. Having that done ahead of time, while someone can do so, it makes it a lot easier than to have to go in front of a judge and be able to try to explain that someone can no longer care for themselves. Those financial representatives that I spoke about include people who help with taxes and insurance, as well as banks and financial advisors. Understanding taxation is always important, but in particular, recognizing that there may be certain types of payments that have to be made throughout the year, and when they have to be paid and where they're going to come from is extremely important, especially in a case where we're trying to make sure that we continue to maintain property for an individual to stay at, to not have to go into a facility, or that property may ultimately fund the care of that individual. So creating a financial plan and a monthly budget would be a very sensible thing to do. And once we have a survey of our caregiving plan, that's certainly something we can consider. On the personal level, there's a number of things that we also have to think about. These include, what are the wishes of the individual with respect to their ongoing lifestyle? Can they stay within their current home for an extended period of time? Or is that not really an option? Are there options with regard to moving in with another family member? And is that something that the person would be comfortable for doing? Is there the possibility that the individual needs to move into a facility? And if so, what type of facility would they be comfortable with? There are many different types of facilities. Some are faith-based, some are not. Some include continuing care as part of the regimen of the facility, where they might be able to move from independent living to assisted living to ultimately being able to have nursing care. Certainly, we want to research the eligibility for any public benefits. This includes things like benefits to veterans from military service, past military service, as well as other types of programs that may be available in the particular locale where the individual lives. And certainly there are organizations like the AARP who can provide some listing of resources that one could research. We spoke a little bit last time about legacy planning and utilizing software like Everplans to record certain information. That includes the type of information I mentioned earlier, things like wills, estate plans, documents such as mortgage information and other types of financial information. All of that can be very helpful to have in a centralized location. And in addition to that, letters of instruction with regard to how someone wants their assets to be distributed and what they want with respect to their care can be very helpful. And maybe it's something they don't want to share, but they do want to know is somewhere that someone can find if that day ever came and they weren't able to provide that information themselves. Having this information in a secure place is something that we always stress, and that's why we talked about utilizing something like a digital vault. You know, having a secure place is something we always thought about as that could be a safe within a home. But now what we're learning through the current sheltering in place experience is that that may still provide some difficulty, because it's possible that you won't be able to get into that home because of restrictions with regard to travel. So again, coming back to the potential of using some type of digital platform to store this information could turn out to be a very valuable thing. What about the stress and the strain it puts on the rest of the family, especially you, if you're the caregiver? Well, it always impacts the rest of the family. And that's something we need to understand. A caregiver is a likely occurrence for many of us. Today, there are 34 million caregivers who are providing care to adults, and we expect that that number will rise as the population ages. And the great majority of them are younger individuals, average age about 46 years old, and a good number of them are women. And so think about that from the perspective of how that event is impacting the lives of the caregiver. That caregiver is very likely to be a daughter who happens to live nearby and maybe has some medical background or training. And now, in addition to having to provide caregiving, there may be in a situation where they have their own families that they have to take care of and perhaps their own job. So any plan that we put together needs to think about the impact on the caregiver itself, trying to make sure that we're being mindful of the mental and physical strain it puts on them, as well as how to be fair to that individual with respect to others who might be able to help. We have a chart that talks about the health triangle, the physical, social, and mental needs that we all have, but in particular for those who are providing care. And so having professional services that can deliver some of this care can be very helpful, whether they're people with medical background or just people that can provide a level of care with regard to adult daycare. That support can help both in organizing information and possibly negotiating payments for different types of services, as well as potentially helping with things like errands and scheduling appointments. And utilizing technology is something that we should consider. Sometimes as people age and are on multiple medications, it can become very confusing, even for people who don't have a cognitive disorder. I mean, let's face it, when you have 3 or 4 or 5 medications with different frequencies and different medication amounts to be taken, it can be a very awesome level of responsibility. So utilizing technology to do so, and also utilizing technology like we're using today, where we're using video to transmit this information, can also be helpful, because that will allow perhaps to be able to monitor individuals from a distance. Keeping in mind that individuals who become the caregiver have to think about their own, preserving their own job. Also, they may need to think about what kind of allowance there is within their own companies for things like support related to leave of absence or other types of things that may be available to them under the Family Leave Act, for example. None of us has expertise in all the areas that we've talked about tonight, and certainly they are complex. And so therefore we talk about and think about the idea of a broader plan, a plan in which we can provide the best caregiving by having a team approach, putting the pieces together, much like building a puzzle, so that we can fit the various aspects of care, whether it's caregiving, medical, financial, all have to come together. And we don't have to do this alone. We can think about the other individuals in our lives who could potentially support, whether it's siblings, whether it's other family members or other friends. We can think about who else can provide emotional support. as we step through this process, which can be very trying. And there are professionals that can provide a great deal of support, whether it's supporting you as our clients, ourselves, or whether it's helping you with other individuals, including attorneys and other financial professionals, including accountants and geriatric managers. So the key challenges that we've tried to cover tonight are ensuring that our loved ones, perhaps ourselves, have the continued care that's going to be required with smart planning. Thinking about addressing all the aspects in a caregiving plan, not just medical, but also legal and financial and personal issues. Recognizing that caregiving affects the entire family. We often say that long-term care doesn't happen to you, it happens to the people that love you. And so thinking about their needs, whether it's financial or whether it's emotional support, should also be thought about. And then finally, thinking about not having any one person have to do this all alone. And there are people that do have to do it alone because they don't have family members. But if we're fortunate enough to think this through ahead of time, whether it's other family members or other professionals, we may be able to get a level of support. There are common reactions to any type of challenge, and caregiving is no different. It tends to overwhelm us. It's extremely complicated. Many of us only go through it once, and so we've never really done it before. The stakes are very high because we have to care a great deal about what we're doing, both from the standpoint of individuals' health as well as their financial well-being. And none of us really have a level of experience in this. It's a continual, ongoing progression that we have to continue to be educated about, and we kind of learn as we go. And we're going to need help. That's the reality. So understanding all of these issues and getting help is part of what we would expect that we would want to do. So we basically support the idea of getting started with a caregiving plan. And I won't go into a lot of detail tonight about this, but I will tell you that we do have resources to help you to design a plan ahead of time that addresses the challenges we've spoken about and helps to identify the individuals we may need to speak to today or at some point in the future. Having a caregiving plan meeting, an overview meeting, sometimes will be helpful with the family, and we can be helpful with that and coordinating that as one of the ways we can provide this support. Now, there may be questions that you have regarding this part of the presentation, so I'm going to stop here for a moment, and I'm going to look at the chat window and say to you that the way that you would communicate with me here in this format is to use the chat and just basically type a message if you have a question or anything that you'd like to me to cover. And I will tell you that we will be following up this webinar with some information that we'll be providing to you, including at some point having this webinar video available to you. So recording of this information and having it available to you at a later time. So while I'm looking to see if anyone has any questions, I'm going to pull up another presentation and cover just a few things around Medicare that I think are important. So let me just pull up another presentation real quickly. As I wait to see if there are any questions. So let me share with you another presentation. There's a great deal of information in these presentations, and obviously we're not going to have time to go through all of it, but there are a few things that I think would be helpful to know about. So I'm going to start sharing this report right from here. So we'll begin here. And again, I won't take much more time. We'll just go a little bit over tonight, a little past a half an hour. But in this first slide, we talk about who's able to take part in Medicare. And the answer is everyone over 65 who has contributed into the system is available for Medicare. and legal residents who have lived in the US for at least 5 years are eligible. There are 3 major parts of traditional Medicare: Part A, Part B, and Part D. And there's another program called Medicare Advantage, which is also referred to oftentimes as Part C. Very simply, Part A is the hospitalization component of Medicare. It is the part that we pay for throughout our lives as we pay Medicare taxes. It also is part of what we get in the other components as well. But Part A is not something we continue to pay for in the way of a premium as we go forward. There is a deductible that is required in Part A, which has to do with each hospital stay. But essentially, the rest of it, of the Part A component of Medicare, is one that is covered under our payments during our lifetime. Part B is a program called Medicare Part B, which covers everything other than hospitalization. So think about wellness visits, so to speak, and doctor visits for specialists. Think about potential blood work that may be needed, or other types of procedures, including ambulance costs and so forth. Those are all covered under Part B. And then lastly, under Part D are Medicare prescriptions. Now, please understand that Part A and Part B are under the CMS, the Center for Medicare Services. They administer Part A and B. That's a government program. We pay for Part B, and I'll show you the premiums in just a moment. And we don't really pay for Part A other than deductibles. Part D, or the drug plan, is administered by a private insurance company. And all of these coverages are coverages, insurance coverages that we can change from time to time during open enrollment periods. So let me show you a chart that talks a little bit about, or refers to, some of the costs of Medicare. I have a lot of information here that I'm just going to move through very quickly, but I think there's a chart that, oops, do I have it in this one? Oops, doesn't look like I have it here. Hold on. Let me stop this for a moment and bring up another chart that shows you some of the costs that we're looking at here. Okay, let's take a look at this one. And we'll share this. One second more here. I think this will be good. To share with you. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, there are these various components of these programs, including Part B and Part D, which have deductibles, have other coinsurance amounts that have to be covered. So in addition to the Part B premium, which the government charges us, we also have, and here is an idea of what the Part B premiums look like. We also have these deductibles, which can be covered by an outside plan, often called a Medicare supplemental plan or a Medigap plan. So what I wanted to show you here is that Medicare certainly isn't free. This is the latest information for Medicare premiums. The Part B premium, right now, the base premium is $144.60 per month per individual. And then in addition to that, there's an additional amount that you would have to add to that depending upon your income while you're receiving Medicare. So you could see that for a married filing jointly, if your income were above $174,000, there's an additional add-on. And for those people who are maybe beyond the age of 65 and still working, a couple could very well find themselves with a Part B additional component of their Medicare cost at over $200 a month, in addition to the base premium. In addition to that is a Part D component, which is the drug plan, and that also has an income-related adjustment. So although drug plans can be as little as 30 some odd dollars a month, depending upon income, that coverage can run upwards of $75, $76 a month. So altogether, and on average, people will pay somewhere around $300 a month for their Medicare coverage under traditional Medicare. That just completes the component that is the government related. Figure on another approximately similar amount for the other coverages that one would need for Medigap insurance. So that all that Medicare premium that we have covers us with regard to certain coverages, but has deductibles. And then we add to that a Medicare supplemental plan that will help defray the cost of those deductibles if they were to come into play. So it's important to understand that there are costs, and there are deductibles, and there are this is a very expensive program. While people are working, I'm frequently encouraging them to save for this expense in the future by things like home health savings accounts. So if you have people in your family who believe that the Medicare system is the be all end all, and we get there, everything's perfect, remind them that Medicare is not free. It is certainly a subsidized program, but it's certainly not free, and it can become a significant part of the overall medical cost. Also, keep in mind that Medicare doesn't cover everything. There's many things that Medicare doesn't cover. Let me see if I have a chart that I can give you just to show you some of the things that Medicare doesn't cover. There are quite a few. Oh, I don't have it in this chart either, unfortunately. But there are many things that Medicare doesn't cover. For example, certain types of therapies, certainly dental, vision are not covered by Medicare. Those would have to be covered by separate insurance, as well as certain types of procedures which may not be covered, including things like acupuncture and other types of non-traditional medical procedures. So with that, I'm going to ask you one more time if you have any particular questions. I know that we've covered a lot of ground, and these are broad areas, but I wanted to particularly pay attention to them today as we move through this horrible time that we're living in, with all of the tremendous pressure from being sheltered and having so much in the way of our medical community tied up with dealing with the pandemic. This is a very, very difficult time. And I think it's important for us to understand the potential impact of a long-term care event. And in the event that we can do something about it by doing some pre-planning, I think that would be a very important thing to do. And then lastly, I ask you to continue to take care of yourselves, to be safe, especially as we recognize that in our region today, somewhere between 35 and 50% of the deaths from COVID-19 are occurring in facilities that care for the elderly, whether they be continuing care communities or whether they be long-term care nursing facilities. So with that in mind, please do take care, look after your loved ones, and please let us know if there's anything that you would like us to cover with you. If there's any way we can help you in developing your care plan, know that there are additional resources that we have that we will be making available to you, including information that we'll be providing and putting up on our website, and ultimately being able to provide this information to you in a video format as we've been sharing with you tonight. So please do take care. Let me just see if there's any questions. Oh, someone asked about, I'll cover one last thing because a good question came in, and it has to do with something called the donut hole, which occurs with regard to payments for prescriptions. So there is an element of Medicare coverage under the drug plans, which is covered and considered to be the base coverage. And then when you get beyond that, and that donut hole, by the way, is shrinking, but when you get beyond that amount, there is a component of drug cost which is not covered as part of the deductible. It's an additional amount that you have to pay. And when you get beyond that, then you get back to the Medicare, I should say, yeah, the Medicare drug plan sharing of prescription cost. So I can get, if anybody wants the specifics of it, I can give it to you. It is something that the government has been trying to address by shrinking the donut hole. In other words, making more of the initial cost of drugs covered under basic Medicare coverage under drug plans and shrinking the hole that way. But there is still a significant component that you could find yourself needing to pay for out of pocket in the event that you have a year where you have a significant amount of drug therapy. I think that's everything that has come in. So with that, I'm going to, again, thank you for being with me tonight. I'll put the video back on and ask you to be in touch if there's anything more that we can provide.